Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Get the Data Behind the Dysfunction, where we'll be discussing excessive stress in the workplace. I'm Jennifer Lawhead. I'm the Communication Manager here at TTI Success Insights, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before I turn it over to our two fabulous co-presenters, a few housekeeping items that I wanted to address. If you're active on social media, we encourage you to use our hashtag today. It's hashtag #MeasureYourStress. We look forward to seeing your tweets and hearing what resonates with you today. As we move through the webinar, please feel free to type in your questions into your toolbar, and we'll be sure to answer any of those as they come through at the end and as time permits. We'll also be conducting a few polls throughout the presentation, so you can also access those polls in your toolbar as well. And we'll be recording this presentation, which will be sent out to you via email within 24 hours. And with that, I will introduce our first co-presenter, Dr. Ron Bonstetter. Ron serves as our Senior Vice President of Research and Development for Target Training International and TTI Success Insights. Established in 1984, TTI believes all people have unique skills and talents of which they are often unaware. Our second co-presenter that I'd like to introduce is Jonathan Eisler. He's the Managing Director of Perspectives Organizational Consulting Group, a division of Perspectives Limited. Jonathan serves as the Vice President of Programming for the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits. And Jonathan believes that for employees to be truly engaged and fulfilled at work, they must have ample support and resources for every aspect of their lives, both personal and professional. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ron to kick off our webinar today.
Well, I'll kick it off. I'm excited that Jonathan's with us today. So we've got practicality and application and some theory, and we're going to put that together, Jonathan, and have some fun with this. All right?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Okay. So, the very first question that comes up is sort of interesting. There we go. When we first started working on the stress, Jonathan, I started talking to businesses about, wow, this is a cool assessment. We could actually learn some things about stress that are going on in your businesses. And, actually, I think the picture that would be appropriate on this page would be an ostrich with its head in the ground.
Agreed. It's great, though, too, Ron. I find in conversations, both socially or whether I'm out dealing with clients and even just colleagues, too, that the topic of workplace stress, it just comes up so often. But when I reflect on it, it's interesting that quite often we're talking about the impact of stress or the fact that we are stressed. And while people may say, yeah, there's a lot going on at work, whatever, we don't spend as much time really thinking about why are we stressed. But it's prevalent everywhere around us. And I don't really see this changing too much with the way that business keeps changing and how we all work keeps evolving.
Yeah, we can get into a lot of that. There's so many exciting topics here that I'm hoping we can expose today. So to start with, though, I think Jennifer actually had a quick survey or a poll she would like to have. And the first one, is just really going to set up the fact that we would hope that people think about a work-life balance. At one point in my life, while people are doing this, please answer this question in the audience here. I remember going to marriage counseling early on in my career. And according to my wife, she was having a problem with me working on my PhD and not coming home for days at a time. And, I had a sleeping bag in my office. I didn't really see that as a problem. So, there's some things that it's not only the stress you have. Sometimes you're putting stress on other people with this work-life balance. There's once you've answered that, we're looking at, well, that's interesting. We've got some people, like 80% are saying that they believe in that balance. And the 20% of you then can join my wife in counseling and see where we go with that. Jonathan, any comments you would make about that 80-20 split that we're seeing?
No, it's quite consistent with stuff that we're seeing as well. And I just want to kind of add to that story, though, Ron. I think that's a great example, good personal example. But I want to just talk about a client that we were meeting with a few months back, and the backstory here is actually they were somewhat of a smaller organization that had been recently acquired and merged with a larger firm. So as often happens in these types of situations, they now had higher expectations as an organization, as a team. But now or I should say, to compound the issue, they also had a couple quarters of some less than favorable financial performance. So as a result of this, they'd actually put a hiring freeze on. So as we can imagine, this could be a stressful situation. So I was out there talking to them, trying to see what we can do to make things a little bit better. And so I just asked them, I said, so what have you done? Because they had also espoused that they had valued work-life balance. And they said, well, we know everybody was stressed. So they started offering some intermittent yoga classes throughout the day. A couple times they would close the office early and take everybody bowling, even had some fun activity things during lunch. So I was like, well, those things sound like fun. I've got to ask, how is the stress level doing now? Why am I sitting here? My two client contacts sort of looked at each other, and they looked back at me with a look of perplexity, and they go, people are actually more stressed here. So, and I'll kind of leave the story there because we'll unpack it a little bit further about how we were able to help them to be a bit more strategic. But I think it's a good example that valuing work-life balance and even just responding to stress in and of itself is focusing on the outcome.
Yeah, and we're going to get to the symptom behind that and actually the cause behind that. And I'm glad that you set that story up. In fact, any good storytelling lays out the problem at the beginning, and then we're going to come back and revisit that, Jonathan. How about another quick poll here? If we allowed people to respond to this work-life balance and give us an idea, that 80% that are doing some things in that category, let's see what kind of answer we would get for the kinds of things that they're doing and making that happen. I might point out that work-life balance is something that we do have to work on daily. While they're taking this poll, I'll just comment that there are days in every one of our lives where priorities take over and we have to do what has to be done, and it probably could not be defined as work-life balance. The problem is when you have to do that day after day. And recently I had someone share with me, they held up a glass of water and they said, what's this a metaphor for? And everybody said, well, it's half empty, it's half full. And he says, no, actually, the metaphor is that I can hold this glass of water for a while and it's no big deal. But if I have to hold this glass of water up above my head for hours, day after day, week after week, things go to pot rather quickly. And that's the problem with work-life balance, is that this continuous problem that we run into really gets out of hand. What are we finding for results on this?
Sure. So we asked you, we just closed the poll, but we asked you, what does your company do to support work-life balance? And we gave you 4 choices. And these 4 choices are the most common that we see when companies are attempting to create that good work-life balance within their organizations. So it looks like 55% of you voted for flexible and remote work schedules. 30% of you said your company supports work-life balance through a wellness program. 9% said it's extended leave and ample vacation time. And 6% of you said company-sponsored social gatherings. Jonathan and Ron, what do you think about those results?
Well, Jonathan, I'm old enough that this flexible and remote work schedule is somewhat new to me. And I'm not opposed to it. It's just something I never lived with. The idea of not coming to work and working. But I think that our new generation with technology that allows this to happen is a reality. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree with this, and I think that too often, though, it can be more of a reactive response without really being intentional or thoughtful about it. I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff in the news about Yahoo a couple of years back when Melissa came in, the new CEO, Melissa Meyer, came in and said, well, we kind of need to reevaluate how this is being done. Now, I'm not saying it was right or wrong the way that she did it, but she did have a good point that we need to think about oversight, we need to think about function, we need to think about a lot of these different things. We were actually meeting with the healthcare system recently. They were looking to improve their work-life balance. And it was interesting as we were having some of these feedback discussions, we heard everybody saying, we'd like a bit more remote options, maybe flexible schedules, but also the ability to work, as you said, Ron, to work from wherever we would like to. But some of the people that were saying that had functions that in and of themselves require them to be there. If you're a caregiver or a service provider, it doesn't quite work. My point using that example is it needs to be intentional, it needs to be thoughtful. In my personal experience, I have seen that one that we only had 6% of our participants today see about company-sponsored social gathering. My experience has been that that's been a little bit higher. So even that example that I gave about that other client, that was one of the ways that they responded to it. So
That's
I think that we're doing good trends, but we need to be intentional and thoughtful here.
Let's take a moment and back up and actually look at why this is a topic today and why we have over 50 people that are taking time out of their busy schedule. We need to realize that stress is really chronic, and it's a major problem that we have. If you look at just the tables down below there, with stress at least once a month and feeling depressed or sad, in the last month, almost half of the workforce are in that scenario. Keeping them up at night, all of those things. And I think the last one actually is also a concern, that they say that there's more stress than in the past years. I'm in the process of putting together a thought piece in which I'm trying to write about how technology is actually outstripping biology. I'm very concerned with the fact that we have created tools in our society that are changing in the last 5 years, the last 3 years. And I got news for you. As an evolutionary biologist, when I worked in that field, human evolution doesn't happen quite that fast. We're outstripping our ability to cope. And that's become an interesting phenomena that has to be dealt with.
That's a great point. I was recently speaking with a client. They're kind of looking at how they can better understand some of the generational compositions and dynamics within their workforce. And a part of my research, I came across a study that had been done by AARP. And a question that was asked was, and of course they broke out the data by generations, they had said, is it acceptable to answer a work email at dinner? And over 54% of millennials said that, yeah, that's acceptable. And of course, you can imagine how that kind of starts to decrease as we look at the generations as they go up in age too. But again, that, to your point, Ron, that's so true. Technology is outstripping what is really capable. And when we look at that last slide, 25% see that it's increasing, or 26% see that it's increasing. That more than equals 100 when you look at the 75% on the other side. So this is something that we have to pay attention to because it's not going away.
Yeah, not at all. And it's also interesting to look at some of the symptoms that come out of these stresses, and they manifest themselves in a physiological and emotional process and a cognitive process. Oh, these are sort of cool. I'm sorry to say that this morning I had a phone call from a friend, and I started laughing halfway through the call, and they really got irritated. They said, first of all, can you come right away? I have locked my keys in the car, and my car has my briefcase and my computer in it. And I have to go to Tucson this morning, and I don't have access to my computer, which I need for the meeting. Okay, so you want me to come right now and go to the house, get a second pair of keys, and come to work to your car? And they said, yeah, but I had AAA come, and they've unlocked the car, and I have my computer, but now I have to go rent a car. Now, I don't know if you were listening real close, but you see, they had to drive to Tucson, and they didn't have a car. What I'm pointing out is right here, cognitive stress. When you are under stress, your executive functions go to pot. This person had a car, had keys, had the computer, get in the car and go to Tucson. They do not have to rent a car. And they had just totally lost track of any thinking. It was just a fun story. It happened this morning. Scary, isn't it?
Yeah, and imagine if that plays out in the workforce when somebody's stressed at work, how that stress would cause them to fumble in meetings, would cause them to maybe not tackle a work project as diligently as they could. So you can see how some of these stress symptoms, when looked at through a lens of the workplace, it can really affect a work organization and an entire culture.
There are two things I want to point out, Jonathan. The first is, I'm going to hit you on two levels. If you really don't care about profitability in the business, which is our next slide, you better worry about your health and your employees' health. I cannot believe this slide, and yet it really has been documented over and over and over again that stress actually is really causing about 60% of our illnesses. And when you go to your family practitioner, they're telling me, again, well over half of the ailments that they have to deal with can be traced back to stress-associated phenomena. Any other comments you'd like to add to that, Jonathan?
Absolutely, Ron. So even in addition to these physical implications, which were one of the other symptoms that we just looked at, and that I think that this really speaks to right here, the 60%, there's other things we need to look at too as we think about our emotional health, our mental health, our these other things that may not be treated by your traditional doctor. So at Perspectives here, we also have a full-service employee assistance program division. So we're continually looking at our data. What is causing employees at organizations, at our clients, to actually reach out for help. So maybe it's help around stress management. Maybe it's access to resources about how stress is impacting them in some other areas of their life. And that number is consistently over 80% as of a contributing factor. Now, it may not be the direct one, but it may be once they've come in, and then whoever's the intake counselor, whoever's meeting with the employee may actually find out that stress is at least one of the secondary contributing factor, but that's 80+% year over year that we're seeing, and our trends are actually showing that this is getting higher too. So it's impacting not just the physical, but as we're looking at here, even the mental health as well.
Looking at data is crucial, and if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, was one of our first slides in here. Your comment, I think I shared with you recently that I did an analysis on the first 7 years of my teaching. I taught for 7 years in a secondary school science program, and I looked back and went to the school district and pulled my attendance records. In 7 years, I missed 14 days of work. Okay, hey, that's pretty good, be proud. What's interesting is that all 14 days were Mondays. There's a pattern here. And that pattern, frankly, scared me, because I had to reflect on the fact that I had all weekend to worry about planning and how the week was going to go. And by the time I got ready for Monday morning, I was freaking out about the week. And that's part of teaching. Some of us right now, I love this job. I show up at 8 o'clock and see what happens. That was not true for 40 years of my life. I had to be prepared, and that's scary. And we have people that have that feeling every day of their life, and it costs money. This is a figure, and I think what needs to be really focused on here is the last line. Every year, this is not $300 billion of lost productivity and medical costs, just one-time shot. It's over and over. It's occurring because we're not solving the problem. How about this? Moderate levels of stress. The problem here is that moderate levels is not measurable. You see, it's different for each human being. Jonathan, I shared with you, Peter Senge is one of my heroes when I think about people that have taught me a lot of things in life. Peter Senge talks about and has this lovely example of a rubber band between your two hands. And you put a little bit of tension on that rubber band between your hands, and life is good. It's called accountability. And that little bit of tension is what's expected on a daily basis. There are things we have to do. What happens if you extend the distance between your hands and you put more stretch on that rubber band? At some point, it breaks. And that is what we have to figure out, is what is this crucial level of stress that makes a difference?
Absolutely. And, I sit there and when I'm having those discussions with some of my friends, like I mentioned earlier, Ron, people talking about the levels of stress that they're having. It's interesting when some people, you'll have the one or two outliers that say, well, that's interesting. I don't really feel any stress at my job. And once I start probing a little bit further and learning a bit more, it's not necessarily always that their job isn't. Well, at first I'm like, well, everybody goes, I want your job. But then my consultant hat goes on and goes, well, either they're not having expectations, to your point, that keeps them actually motivated and productive, or maybe that's some personal characteristics. So I have a friend he does a lot of computer programming, kind of back-end user experience type of stuff. When he describes his job, I almost start getting heart palpitations just hearing it, but he loves it. And if you asked him, he has basically zero stress in his job. So there's also that personal component too.
Absolutely. This is it's sort of exciting because of the multiple dimensions of this whole problem that we have to address. When we first started working in the area and thinking maybe we should come up with an assessment to help businesses, I remember Bill and I talking about the fact, well, if we have zero stress, is that good? I mean, zero stress means that they really don't care. So it was an interesting discussion that goes along with these topics here. But obviously, excessive levels really do lead to some real problems. And what's interesting is that from a neurological standpoint, stress really has a direct impact on hormones. And hormones enter into the body and they do not go away very quickly. So we're looking at even road rage on the way to work can have a carryover to your workday from 2 to 4 hours. Having a interaction with a colleague that is not good, that's unsettling, has a carryover to the rest of that workday. And frankly, many times a carryover into your lived life and into that work balance scenario.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting when I'm talking to business leaders too, while they may not, well, whether they are directly paying attention to the levels of stress, what they will start to pay attention to is the fact that people are kind of, I use the term, pulling into their shell, right? So they may be looking at it from a productivity or from a performance perspective, but to your point, when you're in that heightened sense of alertness or that fight or flight syndrome, we're really just trying to survive. We're trying to look at just what do I need to do to get through today? What do I need to do to not get fired? So that has long-term impacts on the functionality, on the performance and productivity of the organization as well.
You know, you've used the right words again. We have an audience that may not know me very well, but my research is in cognitive neurology. And so when I was just listening to you, it was a flashback again to the fact that this is a fight or flight response, that blood flow and everything goes to that phenomena. And what you end up with is a reduction in that frontal lobe executive functions all go to pot. So what are we up to here?
I'm sorry, tech problem there.
Okay, we've got a quick question here. Is this a poll or is just a question they think about?
Yeah, let's we're not going to set this one up as a poll, but a question to think about. Has stress ever caused you, a close friend or a colleague, to leave their job? And think about that answer, and perhaps it's not you, but you probably know somebody and know very many people who have left because they're simply too stressed. Whether the workplace or whether the job demand is too high, whether they have a demanding boss, whether they don't feel like they're being compensated enough. All of those factors can lead to stress. So something to think about when you're looking at stress. Think about all the individuals you know that have been affected by it.
And Jennifer, I want to add to that too. I've seen it happen quite often too around dysfunction within a team. So maybe somebody may not even just be a culture misfit within the organization, but even around some team dysfunction. I have a colleague that was probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, actually left his job, and he had a pretty high level senior level job, and he left his job based off of some conflicts that he had not only with a new COO that had come in, but also with some others on his team, and he left a job. Now, keep in mind for everybody's information, I'm here in Chicago, so if you even may be working 20 miles outside of Chicago, that could add a lot to your commute. So the case in point is he ended up taking a job that added close to 2 hours per day to his commute for a slightly lower title and a reduction in pay. And he did it because of the environment and the toxicity that was resulting from the stress that he was in there at work. That's pretty big.
So, Jonathan, one of our goals today is to have 50, 60 people online quit their jobs.
Not at all.
We've done a great job of laying the problem. On the other hand, most of us know the problem. Let's deal with some solutions with the time that we have left. And here's what we want to talk about. The fact is, we've got some stress components that really need to be addressed. I did a massive lit review, and I came across a bunch of literature that had been done on analyzing the workplace, and they had identified 7 areas that really were crucial areas that stress could come from. And so we really have an assessment that we're going to let you take at the end of this if you wish. No pressure, no obligation, but we really do have some areas that I think focus on where the problems are. My real concern is with 6 minutes left, but we're going to go through these real quick and see what we can do with it. We want to be able to get to the root of the problem. The fact that you have stress is not going to help us unless we can identify where it's coming from. And that becomes a very major concern. So these 7 critical areas really break it down, and all of a sudden you can figure out whether it's coming from demand, effort, whatever. Now, Jonathan, would you do me a favor and go back to your original story and talk a little more about the fact that this company had put together this social outing to solve all their problems?
Absolutely. And throughout that discussion, though, as I said, we realized that stress had actually gotten worse at the client organization. So we put everybody through this great tool that each of you will have the opportunity to take today, and we were able to not only have individual reports and show each of the people their data, but also see what it looked like for the organization. So we really found out that it was 3 primary areas of these 7. And actually, if you go back one slide for a second, Jennifer, it really looked like, I'm sorry, back another one. It really looked like this. It was around demands of the job, it was around the organizational change, and around job security. And social support, as we see, was only 19%. It was actually very low. So their solutions were really aimed at addressing that. But once we saw this data, it started painting a different picture. So now if we go forward, let's look at that first one, demand, that was causing a lot of areas. So demand even breaks it down a bit further. And so we saw that demand was causing a lot of stress. But then the report for the whole organization showed that it was primarily coming from time management. It wasn't competency match, so that told us they have the right people in the right places, but they don't have enough time, or maybe they don't have enough resources to get done what is being required of them. Remember, their expectations.
So let's all go bowling so that we have more time.
Right, exactly. So it's starting to make sense how they kind of not even missed the bullseye, they may have missed the target. Another one that we saw was organizational change was really driving a lot of their stress. Now, we broke it down into 3 sub-areas there. Organizational communication seemed to be going well. That wasn't causing them a lot of stress. Even the way that the organization was evolving as a part of the merger wasn't causing a lot of stress. But organizational vision, almost everybody was at critical levels of stress in this area. So this started to tell me, they started painting a better picture. They said, okay, so have there been discussions about how we're going to do things differently? We know expectations change. We know we have to make up for a couple quarters of poor financial performance. And also, still keeping in mind, they had a hiring freeze, so they weren't able to replace people that had turned over. And of course, then we saw job security being the third one that was really driving stress. And this was specifically around the job stability. So all of a sudden, we looked at these 3 factors, and there was this big aha moment. We all kind of smiled and said, this starts to make sense. We have new expectations. We have less people. We haven't given them an opportunity to talk about, or we haven't given them directions on how we're going to do things differently. So all of a sudden, instead of bowling, instead of all those other fun things that I would have liked to participate in myself, we came up with a quick plan. They were able to take this data back to corporate and say, because we also showed how everybody's being impacted on those symptoms, we said this isn't sustainable how things are going, because people are going to burn out, more people are going to leave, we're going to have this cognitive breakdown, etc. So we removed the hiring freeze. Let's get some more people on board. We also said, let's talk about what we're going to do different. Let's get together as a group and talk about what has been working, what hasn't been working, and how we're going to go after these higher, loftier goals. And then as a result, too, we will start to see people that are going to be less burned out, they're not going to be leaving, and then people are going to start to feel that their job is a bit more secure. It was a very, I don't want to say quick, but it was a cost-effective and very clear, succinct function that we started to see stress levels drop within the next month or so.
That's just crucial. You know, when I try to summarize, Jonathan, what our real goal here is, I want to give voice to things we all know. Stress is real. But unless we have some mechanism to get at and get deeper and identify, as you were pointing out, some of the subcomponents, even on demand doesn't tell us enough. We have to see where within demand it's coming from. And once you have that, you give voice to the concerns. And it's not a gripe session. It's data that you cannot hide from because it's costing you money, and it's costing you retention. It's costing your employees their health. Those are all crucial issues. And I'll tell you, a caring business is a profitable business. And so we're going to ask that you consider taking one of these 2 assessments. Originally, we wrote an employee assessment, and then people realized, well, yeah, when it asks questions about the manager, yeah, I'm pretty good. So maybe the questionnaires need to be different. So they really are here. If you are a CEO, you may want to take the manager version of it, or if you want to see what the employees are doing, you're feel free to use either of those. You're going to get a report back with lots of information in those 7 categories. Jennifer, I would love to have you share some of the questions that have come in and see if just in the last minute or two we can address some.
Sure. And just a quick housekeeping note about the free assessment. You have a few choices. You can either type in these bit.ly links into your browser now, or we'll be sharing this deck. So you can click through it when you receive the deck. So you'll have that link. So we encourage you to take that. But as Ron mentioned, we'll take a few questions. If you have a question that you haven't typed into your toolbar yet, we encourage you to ask it, and we will try to get to a few of the good questions. We have a good list here. So let's see. We have one attendee who asks, are there stats for Canadian workers? I can guess that the numbers would be close, but if lifestyle brings the numbers down, even at, say, 50%, it doesn't matter to bottom lines. Ron, any insight on maybe other countries outside of the U.S. And stress and any insight you can glean there?
Well, I think maybe Jonathan should make a comment from the business perspective. I can tell you that when I did the lit review on this, that stress is universal. And what's interesting is that we are one of the few countries that are ignoring it. Right now, okay, hang on to your seats because those of you that are CEOs are going to be upset with this. If stress is present in New Zealand and you don't do anything about it, you are fined by the federal government. That they recognize stress as being such a major component that it is a law that you deal with stress. Now, I'm hoping we don't have to go there. I'm hoping people really start to take a hold of this and do something. But certainly, those other countries are addressing it in ways we've never even thought of addressing it.
From a business perspective too, Ron, I will say, and again, the most of our work that we're doing with clients is based here in the U.S. We have a couple international clients. So what I will see from a cultural perspective is, and whether we're talking culture as in nation or country too, I really see how stress is viewed from the top down really starts to impact how an organization responds. So it's not just, is stress impacting people different? It's how are people responding? I mean, that's a great example that you gave about it's a mandate by a country, but we really do see that from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, and I do think that, for example, I recently heard a CEO saying that he wanted everybody in his business happy. So if there was anybody in the business that wasn't happy, let him know so he could fire him. I don't think that's the approach we're talking about. Is there another question here that we could pursue quickly?
Yes, one great question. I read today that stress drives more short-term versus long-term processing, and people are losing their ability to be strategic versus reactive. Thoughts?
No, they're absolutely right. It comes back to executive function, and your ability to do futuristic thinking is one of the first that goes. And it cuts down on theta waves in particular. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm a neurologist. So it cuts down on theta, and theta is essential to creativity and global thinking, problem solving. And so under stress, theta is drastically reduced, and you go into high beta, and high beta comes up with quick answers, but not thoughtful answers.
Great insight. I think we are all out of time for now. Thank you so much for joining us. We invite you to continue the conversation using the hashtag #MeasureYourStress with our Twitter handle at TTI_SI. We look forward to answering any questions there as well and continuing that conversation online. And again, a reminder that we are recording this. We'll be sending that out to you within 24 hours, along with your offer to take a free stress assessment to see how stress is affecting you in your everyday work. So that will be coming to you as well. And you'll have the ability to take that now through the end of May. So we invite you to do that.
And Jonathan, I want you to have the last word. I want you to be able, from a business perspective, you're doing this out there every day. What is your final message to these people?
So when I first heard about this assessment that you guys put together, I got to tell you, it was really exciting for me because, as you said earlier, Ron, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. We haven't found anything like this out there on the market that is able to give actionable data that allows organizations and individuals and leadership to actually make meaningful results from a strategic and a cost-effective perspective. So in a prior life, I worked in employee engagement. I saw how valuable that data was. Now with this tool, I know for the clients that I've worked with, even myself when I've done the assessment, it's something that I can really get excited about. And thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Ron, for this conversation, and everyone else that participated today.
And thank you, Jonathan. I can tell you that I feel energized just having you here to share with us. So thank you so much. And everybody have a great day.
Take care, everyone.